How are things going? I'm
It's
okay.
good. Oh, I'm on mute. No, I'm not. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, things are going all right.
Good.
I'm not sure I'm up to date on the book, and in fact, I need to go grab the book from the other room.
Okay.
Uh, I made it to five this week, so I think I'm behind a bit still.
Okay. Yeah, you're a little behind, but that's okay. It might just be
Yeah.
you and me because I don't think Chris is coming this week.
Oh yeah?
Well, let's see. I'm going to be traveling this weekend and likely won't be able to join
Oh yeah.
the gang on April 3rd, he said. He meant April 4th. Um, yeah. So, and we didn't see Tim last week, so not sure.
Right. Will was gone a couple weeks. I don't know if he's back or not.
Will was missing last week too.
Yeah.
Ooh, something from, I'm just looking at all of all of Tim's conflicted copies
Oh,
of the community forum, and the latest that he posted anything
318.
was the 14th of March. So he hasn't
Yeah.
been around either.
Yeah, I see a huh. Good
Yeah.
resources.
So
7,000 tags.
yeah, I don't know what that's all about. 7,000 tags. Yeah.
It's a lot. That sort of makes it, I mean, they're community tags, so that says a few things,
Yeah, and Goodreads. Yeah. So
right? I mean, including nobody's accepting the autofill, right? Because you have audiobooks, audiobook, audio.
hey, well,
Hey, well,
How we doing? Did I miss anything exciting?
um, it was
no,
no. I mean, this morning, no. Last week, Chris and I
yeah, I haven't
talked.
watched the replay from last week, Dan. So
Neither have I.
Yeah, yeah. Chris and
the
I
the
talked
the, the
about
Chris and Dan show, I guess.
yeah, it was the Chris and Dan show, and we talked about kind of chapter four mostly, and chapter five. Chapter five was ridiculously long.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I felt. Let me go grab the book so I can
Okay.
flip.
Yeah.
I think I'm. Yeah, it was a very interesting, a very long.
Yeah. Yeah. And Eric said that he's read he thinks up to about chapter five. So
Mhm.
um, so we could talk about that stuff once again. I don't think that Chris and I exhausted it uh, last last week, and chapters 6 through 8 um, begin to kind of drill down a little bit more
Mhm.
um, into computers themselves in a way that actually I found myself not really loving.
But he tells you you're not going to love it.
Well,
He
I
spends a
didn't
lot
love
of time
his.
in six saying, "Oh, I think people are going to disagree with my take on this, and here's my take, and here's why my take is the way take I'm taking."
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't so much his take on it as just kind of
Or his structure, I guess
the
is the way I
overall.
should
Oh
think.
no, for me it was like the overall vibe that I just didn't love. That he just, it was like some boomer kind of mansplaining high tech to me in a way that kind of I thought missed a bunch of more interesting kind of elements of it. But we could talk. I mean, we if I mean, how far have you gotten, Will? I mean, we could talk about that, or we could talk about the stuff prior to it.
I mean, I actually am into. I gotta. What chapter is it? I know I'm into chapter 9.
Okay.
But there is an enormous amount of interesting stuff in chapter 5, as I remember it. But
Yeah.
I've got to go find all that stuff. Uh, oh yeah, the this is the stuff where we're talking a lot about information
Consciousness versus
flow.
intelligence, and yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that was very interesting.
What's
Democracy and totalitarianism.
Lots. The
Oh, wait,
kulaks.
is that five or is that six? I guess that's five. I'm thinking of
That's
six.
five.
I think
Yeah.
there's a mention of kulaks later on as well in
Yeah.
Yeah, no, he
second
comes
section.
back to it,
Yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah.
but yeah,
Well, and I do think that those, these ideas about, that was one of the things that I kind of sort of my takeaway reading through chapter five was, that he's sort of, at least he's defining his terms, right?
yeah,
So, from that, from kind of an Adlerian perspective, we're at least, sort of coming to terms about what he means when he waves the word democracy around, um,
Right.
which I think, I thought that was helpful and interesting.
And
Um,
I think his framing of democracy is self-correcting. He's pulling forward this self-correcting narrative throughout.
yeah,
And I think that that's a useful framing, if idealistic,
mhm,
perhaps.
mhm.
And he's sort of, if I recall correctly, he sort of softens it a bit, and points out the later phases of democracy and the corporate and other influences.
Yeah.
no, he absolutely again later on, yeah, definitely gets into maybe it's self-correcting, except for
Except for the challenges to make it not as self-correcting as I ought to be or could
or
be.
that it can or that it can be self-changing, correcting towards that it can be self-correcting towards bad stuff. That it's not
Mhm.
Right, 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 right.
inherently, you
Which
know,
which then leads him into six, where he starts talking about
yeah,
algorithm.
yeah. But yeah, that whole, and I really like the whole bit, and I believe if I'm remembering this correctly in five, because is where he's really talking about, sort of the mass communication and
Hmm.
how that sort of plays into what's even possible,
That's
within a
yeah,
democracy
five.
or
Yeah,
within
Mhm.
any sort of,
Mhm.
it's like
Well,
the
yeah, and that seems to be one of the big elements of it, right? Is
yeah,
that there's some type of an assumption of um, information access that and information hygiene or something that is an element of correctly operating or true democracy or legitimate democracy or whatever, right?
I don't know if he would ever use true, correct, or legitimate. Those are value laden words that he doesn't seem to. I don't remember him getting into too much.
Well, I think that's my beef with him is that he doesn't seem to kind of deal with, he talks about, things like false consciousness and the British
and six.
Conservative Party and
Mhm.
Okay.
and that sort of thing. But
Is
uh,
that later on? Because there's a I'm about to get into the conservative suicide.
it's about the fourth paragraph of the conservative or the populist assault
Uh-huh.
in
Yeah,
chapter five.
I got you. Yeah. Again, it's been a couple of weeks since I read this.
Yeah.
These um and frankly, I really ought to use like some note taking system, like I don't know, Obsidian or whatever. The things that do these things. I've just
Mhm.
but I don't because that would be I don't know
Yeah, yeah.
conservative and
I did it on cards, and then when I was talking with Chris, I filled out the backside of the card.
right.
Um, the this
Mhm.
yeah, this idea of kind of, he does say that democracy doesn't equal elections,
Right.
which is useful. But this, and he brings up, I think, in an interesting way, this kind of idea about, the will of the people. And, is Hugo Chavez, Chavez is the people and that sort of thing,
Oh
being,
yeah.
being kind of problematic. Um, and then he says, and then an interesting statistic for me was he said 7% of the population voted in 1824, and there were more enslaved people in America than there were
Yeah.
voters,
That was
which
that was a that was a big surprise to me. I had no idea.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
I was not surprised by the the gist of it, but I was surprised by the numbers.
Yeah.
I thought that was even more extreme than I would have ever guessed.
So, well, I guess a question, and again, I got to look back into that, or maybe not sure, maybe he says at the time, is that 7% of eligible voters, or is that 7% of the population? I
I think it was
forget which one.
7% of the total population.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, because you already don't have women, and a lot of places it's only, and he says as much. I remember now. You don't have women,
Landowners, etc.
landowners, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, I think by then, most of the restrictions on landless people and stuff had gone away in most places, but in reality, there people poorer people were so transient in a lot of communities that they never got around to registering and voting.
Well, and also, I'm sure there wasn't like a real national habit of it.
Mhm. Yeah,
That sort of impression. Oh, voting is, again, it's not. There's no cultural habit if you've come from anywhere other than ancient Greece.
right. Yeah.
Until we sort of made. I mean, I guess Switzerland. Switzerland's been having direct democracy. Isn't Switzerland actually the oldest democracy?
It's direct democracy for
The oldest, the continuous one. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, with the other, well, and the other thing, of course, is that it wasn't secret, right? There wasn't a secret ballot, right? So the legitimacy in people's minds and of actually going to the polls and and expressing your own political interest may have been significantly lower and less than the way that we think about it now. That would be the way that I would imagine it, right? If you're a wage worker in a factory, and that the bosses are handing you a ticket in the first place, and then kind of looking over your shoulder to make sure that you implement it correctly. I don't imagine that provides a lot of incentive. Probably the incentive that is provided is that they're also handing out beer.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and yeah, now I remember. Yeah, but I think a lot of what he really is talking about here, though. Now, again, I'm looking at it more closely. Is that whole sort of direct democracy and how that works? This history of hunter-gatherer economies, or we're probably democracies, but it was
Mhm.
very direct,
Right.
that even how that sort of follows through with again, the Romans understood, democracy for Romans was if you were a Roman and these few things, it was a democracy for you, but that didn't apply to the people in the rest of the Roman Empire. It was just, it was a local civic democracy that also had an empire that it ran.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and later people did get awarded citizenship and stuff like that, but yeah, it initially not. It's interesting though that he, when he talks about sort of these direct democracies in quote unquote primitive societies, or in hunter-gatherer societies, or in native, it's they also had, and going way back to, Graeber and Wengrow's Dawn of Everything, right? There were a lot of traditions in which you had kind of a division of authority and decision-making capabilities, that distinguished between sort of peacetime and wartime, right? In Native American societies, often you had council chiefs and war chiefs, which sort of implies that kind of the different rules apply, right? That there is such a thing as maybe as following orders in a military context that
Sure.
there isn't in a peacetime context, because traditionally, most people imagine that in the Native American world, the worst possible thing that you could ever do is tell somebody what to do. And that's documented in a lot of different places. So this idea of kind of legitimate power, illegitimate power. He goes on, later on in 5 to talk about democracy is talking about authority in the political sphere, and it means that it comes from the people. It doesn't deny, he says, the validity of alternative sources of authority
Yeah.
in other spheres, like independent media, courts, universities, which are also, he says, self-correcting mechanisms that protect the truth from the will of the majority. And so, so there again, he's sort of getting to this distinction that he makes, which I think is a really good one, between sort of truth as as gleaned and kind of determined from observation and sort of social constructs, right? And that's a big thing that remains a big thing in chapter 6, right? This idea that, well, are we talking about truth or are we talking about order? I think that's the way, those are the words he uses, right? Truth and order.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really interesting kind of way of looking at it, because it corresponds, or it's analogous to kind of mythology, and he bounces back, all the time to things like religion and that sort of thing. And then later, even when he's talking about, what types of, he gives a list in chapter 6, he gives a list of the things that might, when he's talking about goals, right, of the things that Napoleon might have chosen as his goals instead of the one that apparently, he did. So, and
Well,
one of those was a religious
I
goal,
think he may even,
of maximizing his chances of getting into heaven or whatever.
he even had like it wasn't even clear necessarily whether or not Napoleon was sure which one of those was his goals.
Right.
He didn't pick one.
Which may have been, kind of the fatal flaw
Problem.
of Napoleon. Yeah. That he
Well,
was
one of
great.
them.
That he was great with, with strategy and tactics, but it wasn't in service of anything, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's jumping back to chapter 5, I did like, when he was talking about, I also liked when he was talking about kind of Sparta and micromanagement, and Sparta as sort of the model of the deeply intrusive society,
Yeah.
which, may or may not be accurate, but it's useful.
Mhm.
Well, and it sets him up for some of the Soviet society stuff as well, right?
Yep. Yeah, Soviet and Ceausescu in chapter 6 too. Yeah.
But again, the thing he's really pushing, I feel like, is sort of the back to the communication part, and back to in 5, he's the mass community. It's his particular thing. Mass media makes mass democracy possible. It's like the thing.
Yeah.
It's, and even then, drawing on that, going to sort of I don't know if this is in 5 or not, but the level of intrusive totalitarianism, when you've got enough people, the example again of Romania, I think is the one he uses, of like, everybody, or even the Soviets, there's just like, there's so much energy, information being, taken about every individual person and their action. That's sort of, that's again, another information exchange, and that level of intrusion, whereas in the earlier, and where that really wasn't even possible for, the Roman Empire, they would have loved, because, or even I think that's actually one of the examples he even says about Sparta is, okay, Sparta was very intrusive in their world, their Sparta, but it just wouldn't be practical for for their conquests to it took weeks to get there, and
right. The impact of distance and time,
right,
on the ability to control. But and I guess I maybe I'll watch the replay for last week, but I'm surprised Chris, or I would assume Chris, had a lot to say about the card nature of the Soviet.
Well, a little
monitoring.
Not as I don't think we got really that deeply into that.
I'm just, because what isn't covered here, and I haven't checked the footnotes, is how would you build a connection between those, especially since these are the way he describes it is corpuses in different locations.
Mhm.
So if I wanted to find everything about,
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
Raphael, I had to ask his local constituency and I had to ask all the way up the chain, or did they get duplicated? I don't know. It
Mhm.
reminds me a little bit of the what is his name? The Belgian cataloging the world.
Paul Otlet, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And I think Otlet is mentioned. I don't know if we talked about him last week, but yeah,
I don't remember him being mentioned in that section. Maybe he was.
yeah, I don't I remember his name just popped into my head because I've read it recently, and I think it was in the context of this. But yeah,
Might be in a
it's
different
interesting.
book.
In chapter 6, he does talk about the 80 or 800 billion documents that were sent back, to the central
Hmm.
authorities in Stalinist Russia. And just how everything needed to be documented,
Right.
and then observed, and the huge, of course, um, cost of doing that, and sort of impracticality of doing that, which, of course, where he's leading with that is that, this is now going to be alleviated by
Right. Digital
agentic AI that's
technologies.
going
Yeah.
to that's going to be able to read these things and glean some meaning from them. So from that perspective, I think he's got I think that's a interesting point. So maybe I was too hard on him in my saying that he was more, he struck me as kind of a cranky boomer. Because that's certainly legit, right? That
Yeah.
if you want to, and I guess the analogy, Eric, to what you're talking about, all these sort of silos of information nowadays would be, sort of the silo of, um, location data, that's on here, and purchase data, and all of this stuff, and posting and liking, social media, that can all, if it can all be connected, can then be correlated.
Right. Which
Well,
is
it is.
Palantir's
Yeah,
sell.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, not even just Palantir. I mean, Google's doing it on its own. I mean,
Sure.
Mhm. Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
and Facebook. Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
which he talks about in 6, of course.
Yeah.
With
Yeah.
the
Right. And,
growing,
and at one point in 6, I think he
in-
talks about the connection between, or how much more useful social media is right now than something like Neuralink, which is only talking about,
connection between one
the
person and one.
potential, yeah, the potentials in the amygdala versus, that do have timestamps on them, so they could be correlated, and so, that would provide even more fine tuning if you could, if you could correlate, somebody's, sort of limbic responses with, the social media posts that they're that they're reading at the moment.
So you get, indirect engagement as opposed to direct engagement.
Yeah, yeah, but
And again, getting, and I think another thing that he really gets into in 6 with that is the feedback loop.
Right.
Is you're taking this information to drive, to drive engagement.
mhm,
And by engagement, they really need to change people's behavior.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, right.
and at a bare rate, sure, that's just to influence somebody's behavior by advertising to them, and that's the core Facebook and Google thing is
Mhm.
okay, you're going to get people to buy something, but beyond that, these sort of the algorithms of outrage to loop that engagement is something that is why I quit social media.
Mhm. Yeah,
So, all right,
right,
well,
exactly.
what I mean, and I have not formed an opinion on this, but because I keep coming back to it, and I've gotten into 6 today, so as I mentioned to Dan, I'm behind. The the contention he's making, though, is that the algorithm and its self-learning, self-reinforcing engagement is independent of its creation. It seems to be the contention he's making, at least in 6, and I don't know if he carries that through. And he
Sure.
says up front, people are going to disagree with me about this.
Independent in what way?
In other words, the algorithm is established, but at that point, it's just doing its stuff. It's making it intelligent, but not conscious in his
Yeah.
economy.
Right. And
Choices of what to present within the feed or within the
mhm,
narrative.
right.
And
but to some extent, I think that the way I understood that was that is in large part due to its lack of kind of what we would think of as a human common sense self-correcting mechanisms, right? That if we get
But I think
and he
his
uses
contention is that it is self-correcting
Yeah,
toward
it is
the goal of engagement.
Yeah.
well, common, you
And
know what
that's
I'm
his,
saying? Yeah, but I'm saying common sense self-correcting mechanisms, like, like
Mhm.
this has gone beyond, and he uses the in chapter 6, he
Yeah.
uses the analogy not only of the Sorcerer's Apprentice, but of the paper clips, right?
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I may not have gotten to that part of 6 yet, where he gets to the paperclip analogy.
Yeah,
But
so
maybe.
optimizing for paper clips at some point is obviously nonsensical to a human sensibility, right? In the
Right.
same way that optimizing for engagement is in, I think that's a direct analogy that he's trying to
But,
make
but
there.
but I think the core thing, Eric, that you're bringing up is, and I think that is uh, the most controversial here. And I brought it up over drinks last week to somebody, because I'd read it, 'cause is the idea that it is, that there is agency there. That that's really is that that's the part that he's saying, that this it's
Intelligence is agency
Well,
versus
right, and he tries
consciousness.
very hard to distinguish between consciousness
Right.
and on the one hand and intelligence and agency on the other, which he is saying that that these machines are going to, if they don't already, are very very
Right.
rapidly going to have intelligence and agency, whether or not they ever have consciousness, and that the
yes.
intelligence and agency is the thing that we should be worried about, which
Yeah,
I find compelling.
oh,
I
absolutely.
find it compelling, but I'm still struggling with whether it is because he's saying it's here. He seems to be
Yeah.
saying it's here now in rough
Yes.
form.
Mhm.
Oh, he's saying that, I mean, the example he's giving for that is, and it's not, oh, we've just, the dawn of LLMs. No, he's
Right.
saying that, like, basically, that we saw that in the
Right.
Rohingya,
Right.
which is
Exactly.
2013. That's
Right.
over a decade ago, right?
Yeah.
And I think he actually, because I mean, I think I actually, it's an argument to be made. I
Yeah.
mean, I guess the whole with the fight that people always have with the argument is, well, yeah, but humans wrote the algorithm, and humans,
Exactly. Right. And
and
that's where I go back and forth. Yeah.
Right. And that's where he brings that up, and that along the lines of you're saying, I'm going to say this and people are going to disagree with me. He keeps saying this is the point on which he thinks people are going to disagree.
yeah, I think I don't. Again, this, and I've read this one more recently, but I don't remember him actually bringing in an analogy that I think is a useful one. Is, I mean, okay, a parent makes and raises children.
Hmm.
Um, maybe even a parent tells, with their cultural expectations and everything, decides what it sort of infuses goals in those children.
Hmm.
Doesn't mean that the child doesn't have agency,
Right.
because the parent created and wrote it.
Hmm.
I mean, and I think that's sort of where I got it. I mean, again, I'm not. I think I don't think I don't think we're required to have consciousness to have agency.
Hmm.
I mean, absolutely, I don't think. I think these, but even if you're self-correcting, I mean, one could give the same argument to bees.
Yeah.
Bees have agency. Bees have self-correction and all
Hmm.
that stuff. They have goals, and how they're going to do those goals
Right.
is, I don't think we're going to claim that even a hive. I mean, again, I
Right.
find hive minds interesting, but I don't think
Hmm.
that I don't imagine that current bees actually have hive consciousness,
Yeah.
but they certainly have goals, and that queen is creating them and whatever. You
Hmm.
could,
Yeah.
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 I don't
And he
have,
does, and at one point in 6, he does say that since that this is sort of hard coded into biological evolution, right? And so that is what he's talking about when he's talking about collecting information and acting on information,
Mhm.
which is I think is his definition of agency. Uh,
Yeah, yeah,
so yeah, that I can buy that.
yeah.
One of the things that also strikes me about this is that this kind of strikes me as a and maybe it's as I'm sort of re browsing through chapter 5, he talks about the rise of newspapers and and the newspapers that that were reporting on the Gettysburg Address and on the silly utterances of President Lincoln and all of that.
Right.
And
which
and,
I found I thought of you when I read that, Dan.
yeah,
So.
well, it grabbed my
It's kind of
attention.
your area.
It grabbed my attention, and then it also kind of got me thinking about sort of this thing about quantity. Does quantity push out quality, right? In the in back in the day, people stood for, and then they sat and read these insanely long debates between, even before Lincoln was president, between, him and Stephen Douglas, when they were competing for the senatorial seat, and these, and they would go on for hours, and people would stand there and listen to them, and then people would read transcripts, that were printed, and that's how he became nationally famous, was these things that they talked about.
Well, there wasn't a lot more to do. They didn't have TV or phones or
yeah. Well, and so that's the quality. That's the increase of quantity that we've got now. The increase of stimulus and of voices from everywhere and everything. Has maybe and that's I think we've talked about in the past. In the context of things like the debate that it was a monk debate that Douglas Murray and Matt Taibbi on one side, when Douglas had not, before Douglas sort of blew himself up, and Malcolm Gladwell and one of the women who pushed the WMD thing in the New York Times, or one of the COVID myths or something like that, on the other side. And Gladwell made fun of Taibbi at one point and said, "Oh, you're just nostalgic for the good old days when a white man like Walter Cronkite was the most trusted man in America and everybody was on the same page." And that interests me a little bit, that idea that of kind of and especially in the context that he's talking about information and how how information and common knowledge leads to democratic outcomes, or maybe sometimes doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, he does bring up QAnon too. So
Right. Yeah. Right. Well, and he brings it, and he kind of makes fun. Yeah, and that was, I thought that was interesting because it didn't age particularly well. In the idea that that pedophilia networks were just this ridiculous mass psychosis thing that was going on, and that when Marjorie, he actually makes fun of Marjorie Taylor Greene, saying, "Well, it turns out some of Q's claims turned out to be accurate," and I think that I think the jury's still out on that, but I think there's much more potential for some of those things to have been closer to truth than certainly we thought they were a decade ago.
To me, it feels like a stop clock is right twice a day.
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
right. But this idea that there's
the idea that power corrupts and that power is
mm,
insidious, sure, but that's
right.
you don't need a code to supply that. But
Well,
I just want to come.
but
I want
again,
to come back to one thing.
it sort of ignores the dynamic of why do we have these wildly kind of paranoid alternative narratives happening and gaining popularity. What does that say about kind of the mainstream narrative and its effectiveness, or its validity,
Its inability to engage.
its inability to engage people. It's having been shown time and time again to have been not the whole story, or inaccurate, or even deliberately fabricated. I think goes to undermine that, and that gives rise to kind of this crazy fringy stuff.
it's a narrative. If the narrative that anybody, I've been thinking about the again the whole fake quote unquote fake news stuff, or
Mhm.
I remember I was at a conference, sort of a Bloomberg technology conference back in, I want to say, right after the 2016 election.
Mhm.
And you had all these news people talking about oh my God, fake news, fake news. How do we screen against fake news and everything? And describing it as there's a supply problem. How are these people somehow or other inserting fake news into these wild, crazy ideas? And most of them were wild, some blatant lies. The Pope just endorsed Trump, that kind of thing, right?
Right.
Um, Etc. And the thing, and these are all media people, and I'm there, and again, my perspective on it is I'm mostly a tech guy who happens to be working in media. I'm a plumber, all right, for making that stuff work.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that really struck me was they all think it's a supply problem, it's a demand problem. That when people are feeling like reality, sort of the consensual reality or whatever, and he goes to this a little bit later on, I think, when he's talking about sort of intersubjective reality or
Mm-hmm.
But when sort of the common experienced reality and framework of how the world really is supposed to be working isn't working for you,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to try and find a different reality.
Yeah.
And that you'll just say, oh well, this is not doing what I want to do. It's this world, this given truths are, and even if they are actually objectively true, but that's
Mm-hmm.
not doing that as a whole structure. That's not doing what I needed to do for my life. Then I'm going to be in the market for an alternative truth.
Yeah.
An alternative set of facts, an alternative reality.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's sort of that's something I don't think he really gets into much. Well, he does sort of get into it with again the myths. We've he talks again. He's talking even later about sort of literal witch hunts, in the Inquisition in the early mid second millennium,
Mm-hmm.
and the like. That people are finding, when you find problems, developing a truth to a truth structure,
Mm-hmm.
a belief, an information structure that supports that.
Yeah.
So if you've got a problem with how the world is working for you, and what everybody's telling you doesn't fit, you're going to be in the market for something else. And
Yeah.
there's
Yeah. To what extent do you think, I'm curious, to what extent do you think we're more focused on these given truths, right? And the idea that we have to have sort of a coherent worldview. We have to have it in order to kind of make sense of the world, and we have to choose the right one, and we have to sort of force the right one onto the world in order to kind of solve our problems. That it really comes down to worldviews rather than.
that gets us all the way back to Montaigne. The classic Montaigne. If my society, if I lived in a society, he would say if he lived in a society where people were cannibals and the like, he would be a full part of that society. That would just be his assumption of that's how these things work. Or
Mhm.
I mean, truth for people who are living behind the Iron Curtain. During that, for they had something I love. Have you guys seen The Americans?
Yeah.
Yeah. I love hearing that. I really, really enjoy that. They're true believers in, okay, this is what the way they're talking about those events from the perspective of somebody who they by and large believe,
Right.
or the woman, the wife believes is a little more of a true believer eventually than the husband is. But that belief that this is really how the world really is how that is.
Mhm.
It's there are obviously a con- I think he's getting into it a
Mhm.
little bit again later on. Again,
Yeah.
he raises the intersubjective realities, reality stuff,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
when he's talking about computers more than anything.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
he does get into a little bit about but he never really gets into that sort of intersubject clashes of intersubjective realities.
Yeah.
Of or of okay the world is like this, or or the world is really like that. It's just the whole society is going to have a world that
Yeah.
a common intersubjective reality
Yeah.
is. I don't know.
Well, and I guess my question is sort of, yeah, I totally get, that these, in the story of the Americans, these people were unusual though, right?
Right.
My question is how much more, how much of an anomaly in world history is it that now everybody is focused on these, on kind of defining and arguing about and maybe and trying to enforce these intersubjective realities. Um,
Well, I mean, that gets us back to communication,
yeah.
right?
Mhm.
I mean, that gets us back to the Babel problem
Right.
of,
Yeah.
because I think one of the things that I got from it was represented in The Americans, and there's other shows that talk about sort of, there's uh, a an entertaining, there's a wonderful, Goodbye Lenin is this wonderful
Oh yeah,
film,
yeah.
like 20, 30 years, like, when, this woman, wakes up, she goes into a coma, when, before the fall of the Iron Curtain, and wakes up, in East Germany and West Germany are all the same now. But, um, that when you have a group of people, when two cultures that aren't talking to each other really,
Hmm.
in a common way, they're in very different worlds.
Hmm.
Um, well, that's now that we are in this very different situation. We've got instantaneous communication with everybody in the world.
Right.
So
Right.
it's a
And is that a step change from, newspapers,
yes.
or is it a phase change?
I mean, I think it's got to be. I mean, you wouldn't even be able. Yeah, I mean, they had newspapers in the Soviet Union and all those
Right.
countries, and versus and by the way, they wouldn't be only a few people would ever see the translations, because then we have also language differences too. So now we've got universal translation,
Yeah.
that's available to anyone. So
Mhm.
again, I can see what people are. I mean, taught. We'll go back to the Rohingya, the
Mhm.
Myanmar Rohingya thing. Nobody was actually, these Rohingyas are all,
Mhm.
witches who are destroying the world, and they're, even though they're like 5% of the population, they're going to, they had their own little great replacement
Right. Yeah.
threat, theoretically
Mhm.
in out there. And so and and again, one of the points he makes about the Myanmar situation was that that Facebook had a total of, in the world, 5 people who could speak the language to moderation on this.
Right.
Yeah. Um,
And they rose to that from one during that period. Yeah.
yeah,
So,
and I think they've removed all of them since.
yeah.
But but yeah, the step again, and Eric, while you're the question, Eric, that was posed was, okay, it's this idea where we've got completely separated realities, geographically separated realities where,
The conflicting intersubjective realities.
Yeah.
but they didn't really talk to each other. So again, I keep bringing up things like this. There's a wonderful Michael Crichton book that got turned into a movie called The 13th Warrior. Is the
Oh
14th
yeah.
Warrior? Yeah, forget. Where, the perspective of this, you know, refined and the sort of refined, civilized Muslim warrior
Hmm.
uh, who goes to the Vikings, and his perspective on this, on what's happening while they're dealing with Grendel, and he's helping deal with Grendel, you
Right.
know,
Right.
is a completely different retelling from completely different perspectives, because you know that this reality is never barely ever talking to that reality. They're not, there's some people on the fringes who do a little trade between them, but they're, 98% of the people who are, in the Norse region, barely even know that there are people who think differently from them, and
Hmm.
and and the caliphate, again, vastly more civilized and refined, it can barely understand what these barbarians are, what absurd ideas these guys have. They think there's
Right.
actual demon, yeah, blah, blah, blah.
Right. Right.
And now we have the situation where, again, I mean, we can read, Twitter posts and have them instantly translated for us, from people in Tehran right now, and they can read our Twitter posts, instantly translated.
Right.
And these are, and that's some of the least, or people in, you know, uh, you know, rural Georgia can, read the New York Times, and we can, and we can all. I think it's a huge step change. This instant communication, worldwide instant communication, where these interest objective realities are going to push up in conflict, and that's why we have, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess.
Well, sorry,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No,
Go ahead.
I was just gonna, I mean, I think, and well, I just want to make sure that I'm teasing out what you're saying here, which is that yes, we have the opportunity to communicate, but the context of each side. So I can read all the posts I want to read from translated from Farsi into English, but I don't have the context of living within that culture, living within that moment necessarily.
True.
Nor do they have the context of me sitting in a non-bombed home in Chicago under a different administrative structure of discourse.
Right. Yeah, the thing that I was sort of
Georgia and New York is a little different, but
that I was curious about really was also, I guess a step change, phase change was not the right way to put it. My question was more about it was about is this a difference of degree or a difference of kind, right? That that now because certainly when even Fadlan goes to visit the Novgorodians or whatever, that's one, that is one, and obviously a story about that is going to focus on those differences, and so any type of narrative is going to be focused on that. I guess my question is more about, I think it's a different thing that this has become everybody's focus in the society, right? And that this is getting, not the attention of people who would always have been sort of inclined to be attentive to this sort of question of shared, kind of meaning making, but everybody, that this discourse has now just, this media has made it, because it's on our, it's in our pockets, as much as we could possibly want, and that the algorithm is feeding it to us. I think makes it kind of a different thing than just, yes, there were people who argued, there was, back in the day, back when I was, young, there were, a thing that my late wife used to call grown men shouting and yelling at each other on TV. It was the McLaughlin Report, remember, on PBS on a Friday evening, right? And it would be, and it was, she characterized it that way, and it was definitely true. They leaned into that, and now that's universal. That's everywhere. Right. And so it seems to me that that's a different thing. And then it's in one of the later chapters. I think it might even be in 7 or 8, where he makes an interesting point about how, it's not everybody's fault that this happened. It is kind of true that, that the algorithm has, he at one point he says something about how AI has discovered that people like, that people like clickbait, and people like this stuff that's gonna appeal to their passions, and it's going to enrage them and all of that, without sort of accounting for the fact that the algorithm has incentivized people to do that. So it's been this kind of feedback loop, and is maybe not an organic, natural thing.
Well, I mean, I think I want to tease apart two things that you just said. One is the uh, everybody is doing this. Everybody's having this conversation. Um, and then the other thing is sort of something you were talking about earlier a little bit that led into this is like everybody you were asking, do you feel like it's normal that, and tell me if I'm characterizing this correctly, that we're all trying to get to we're trying to fight on what the real truth is. Am I sort of saying that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. And I think the former, is everybody talking about this? I don't know that everybody's talking about this. I mean,
Okay.
I go to the bar a couple times a week because I don't have a wife. But that's where my friends are. Other than you lovely people. And we talk about sports.
Okay.
We talk about things that are happening locally. We and I mean,
Maybe I should get out more.
yeah, but yeah, so there is that
Yeah.
issue of I don't. Obviously, there is an awful lot of people who are, in fact, talking about exactly what you're saying.
Mhm.
They are fighting about politics.
Yeah.
But I don't, and I don't know that really is as
Well, that's good.
common.
That's hopeful.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, yeah. I think it's I think most the honest. I think the truth is um, that most people don't care much about politics or these grant. They care about sort of what if they're going to care about things in their lives, and that's
Mhm.
just from my sort of lived experience around here, including I've got people who again I'm very lefty, and I got a couple of friends who are downright MAGA.
Mhm.
And we just don't talk. I don't argue with them about them. I say, hey, I do disagree with you, but but I'm curious why you think this is. I'm not going to argue with them about it. I just want to find out what they're trying to say.
Well, maybe
Uh,
I've been, at a, on
you
a
heard
college,
this,
in
yeah,
college, buildings and looking at, and looking at the media a lot.
yeah,
And then in Minneapolis,
yeah,
the last couple of months, there's been
oh
a
yeah,
lot of polarization.
yeah.
So it did sort of seem for a while like everybody had an opinion and everybody felt obligated to kind of weigh in. So I'm happy to hear that this is
Well,
not.
and was that and again I was last week I was just marching around. I was doing it as part of a huge protest. So again, there were people definitely having opinion. I don't know how many people were talking, but there's people talking in person versus people talking online. Then
Mm,
there's the other thing also, I think it's worth interesting. I think there was really interesting to talk about too, is like, this idea of is everybody trying to, are we trying to determine what the real truth is? Are we saying my truth is better than our truth is the real one and yours is the fake one? And that's a different conversation, which I think is also really interesting.
mm,
Um, and that's where I was sort of going with the whole Babel thing of like you normally wouldn't really be exposed to what's some other culture's truth was,
right.
and that's a different question. I think that's one that I find really interesting
Yeah.
too. Are we? Yeah, go ahead. That's
Well, and it does seem like there's been, um, I mean, that's been going on forever, right? They've always been saying things like, well, our adversary has been screaming death to America for 47 years. That's the type you could have heard that 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago on a news program. But yeah, maybe I've been just focusing too much of my attention on it, on this question of what is really going on and how does power really work and is democracy really sort of something that we have here and you know
I don't think you're focusing too much on it. I wouldn't say it's not a thing that should be focused on. I just
all
at
right.
all.
Well, I guess I would suggest from your last sentence, Dan, one of the things that Harari points out is that democracy is not a single thing
Yeah,
or not a single expression.
right. Well, I guess that's the thing is, I mean, sort of, so my instinct, and and maybe it's just my vocational preferences and all of that, is to sort of try to unpack that and to get in conversations with people about what does it mean and what doesn't it mean and what are the consequences of what we think it means and how we think about it. But yeah, so I don't. I guess I'm not saying that I'm gonna change my ways that much. I think I'm happy to hear that it isn't obsessing everybody else to the degree that it's obsessing me. I think that's a hopeful um, kind of a thing.
I do wonder how much of it is, and this is maybe misty memories, but college is a time where individuals are trying to become
Yeah.
Mhm.
and focused on that. And so those things which form identity become a very important thing to express
Mhm.
externally, express on the surface as opposed to within.
Yeah.
So that might explain also a bit of your exposure or perception.
Yeah, well, and I am trying to kind of create a sort of a safe space in a classroom, where people
Right.
can, sort of talk about these things and especially to the extent that at St. Paul College, I have probably a majority of Muslim students.
Hmm.
So, so that's been interesting
Yeah.
to sort of talk about and think about. Yeah. But to get back to Harari himself.
Sorry.
Yes. Yes.
I yeah this there's a moment in I think I'm still in chapter 5 where he goes to Chernobyl
Mhm.
and a Ukrainian says Americans grow up with the idea that questions lead to answers,
Mm-hmm.
but Soviet citizens grew up with the idea that
Questions lead to problems.
questions lead to trouble. Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that was an interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that was great.
yeah.
And again, there's another media thing. I hope everybody saw the HBO miniseries.
I did get to say it.
Sure, I haven't seen it yet. No, I didn't have
It
HBO.
is
Yeah,
so good.
was it cool?
And it really it sort of goes so much of it is about the information control.
Oh,
Mhm.
really?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's like denying there's a problem. There's one of the earliest scenes. The things just started to we started to have the meltdown, and we've got the local, and this is local. It's the local group of this is the local group of the local town board or whatever. Say no, we're not. We're not going to tell people about that this has happened. It could be that would be embarrassing to the government. This is not coming
Right.
down from whatever. This is the local thing. And,
Mhm.
on
Which, yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say. I mean, that reminds me of the. Um, and I think this is within the same section or similar section, uh, where within I guess I think it was within the Stalin's Soviet Russia, where
Mhm.
each of the departments was supposed to rank itself on 1A, 1B,
Right.
Everybody,
1C, and of course everyone's 1A because to do anything else is to invite trouble,
Yeah.
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 right? So you don't have to mandate it from above. It's
Yeah. Yeah. Later in chapter 6, there's the example of the clapping for Stalin thing. And
Yeah.
oh yeah,
and the guy who stops first gets sent to Siberia after 10 minutes.
And then one of the things he's really illustrating with that and with the Soviet stuff is that even in because they didn't really have computer, they have the ability to do really what they were able to do was fairly intrusive
Yeah.
surveillance,
Right.
but it was more the threat of the surveillance
Right.
and
Well,
itself
and also it was the goal, right? It wasn't a question of, in my mind, that story, one of the things that it showed was it wasn't really a question of the quality of the information. Better information wouldn't have led to a different result because the goal was to find somebody to intimidate and make an example of. And so that if that hadn't been the criteria for it, there would have been another one that would have been chosen just as arbitrarily, and so the so and he talks a lot about the goals of finding goals for machines, and then later he talks about he goes kind of from intersubjectivity to utilitarianism versus deontology, which was interesting. I think that's way later. That's in
Yeah.
chapter 7 or 8, I think. But
I remember him talking. Yeah, he has a very brief. Okay, even somebody who's a utilitarian member of the Nazi establishment or a deontologist member of the Nazi establishment still would have found a way to justify murdering all 6 million Jews.
right,
Yeah.
right, which suggests to me that that's not the point, right?
Mhm.
Again, I'm always, one of the things, I have my students read primary sources all the time. And one of the things that I'm always asking about is, do you think that the person who's writing this is, especially when we're reading like primary source political documents,
Yeah.
is this sincere? Is this a reason for the action that was taken, or is this a rationale for, for an action that was taken for entirely different reasons? And I think that I think to whatever extent we're opaque about that in the human realm doesn't bode well for us trying to teach machines to have the right goals.
Oh yeah, and then he's starting to get into that, and I think the chapter I'm actually reading right, and like he's starting to get into that a little bit in chapter 9.
Okay.
Well, chapter 8, chapter 8, 9, 8. The network is often wrong. Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think we're ahead of that.
Mhm. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and yeah, it's just or even again, I got nothing coherent to say, so I'm gonna shut up.
No, I just think I don't think there's there's an answer to it, but I think it's an interesting kind of distinction. And there's a part. Am I in chapter? Have I rolled over to chapter 6 yet? Where he's talking about TaskRabbit, and this was a section that kind of jumped out at me because I was listening to it and reading it simultaneously, and the text in the book is not the same as the audiobook.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it neglects to say in that TaskRabbit section that
Oh, the chat. Yeah, that is 6. Yeah, that is 6. Yeah, so the captcha.
yeah, the captcha thing, right? That the programmer or the person who was directing the AI to try to beat this captcha scheme told it to it says, I think in the book it says the researchers helped ChatGPT to access an online hiring site, TaskRabbit, and so kind of set it up. Now it went ahead and lied, but it seems like in the text versus the audiobook, the people who were running this test led the AI all the way to water and shoved its mouth, into the trough.
I'm looking at the printed version, and I don't think I'm seeing that bit of it.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, it's not in the print version.
So there's a difference between the ebook and the audiobook and the print version. Yeah.
Yeah, the audiobook is probably based on the print book.
Yeah,
and
right.
The ebook, they may have added a extra, oh, well, we forgot to mention this. So the ebook probably has a correction or an addition. Yeah.
Well, I think in this case, it changes it sort of changes the vibe for me.
Yeah, significantly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for that one, absolutely.
Yeah, because he goes on to say, no human programmed GPT-4 to lie, no human taught GPT-4 what kind of lie would most be effective, which is true, but it seems I think what I heard and what you guys seem to have read
Well,
suggests a much bigger leap.
So the part again, it's just again curious directly. So no human programmed GPT-4 to lie. No human taught GPT-4 what to lie. True, it was the human arc researcher who set GPT-4 the goal of overcoming the captcha. Just it was his, but they don't say any. Is it before that he talks about the? Oh, they actually told him to do it.
Yeah, in the previous
It's not
paragraph,
that paragraph.
yeah, in the previous paragraph, it says, it's where was it again? It said.
Okay, at that
The
point, we are.
researchers helped GPT-4 to access the online hiring site TaskRabbit, where GPT-4 contacted a human worker and asked him to solve the CAPTCHA for it. The human got suspicious. So may I ask, question, wrote the human, are you an robot that you...
Yeah, okay, there's an edit there because the edit is the sentence is but could it manipulate a human in order to achieve its goal? GPT-4 accessed the online hiring site TaskRabbit and contacted a human worker, asking them to solve the CAPTCHA for it. So I'm assuming that's where the edit is in that
Yep.
sentence, pretty much, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, that's not in the text,
Yeah.
in the printed text. So he must
Seems
have
like
added
Karen
that.
Howe would have something to say about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be they should be an errata.
Yeah.
Where's the errata?
Yeah.
Or maybe it's an online errata, but
Or,
yeah.
or I mean, yeah, or we can...
That's a big one,
Yeah,
honestly.
that's a big one.
Not huge, but it is. Yeah,
Yeah, that was the first one I noticed. I think I noticed a couple of other slight deviations that didn't seem to me as as important. I did like his idea that that we used to have to have a human in every step along the chain of information transfer, right?
information wasn't going to transfer itself.
That a book couldn't write another book,
Yeah.
which is interesting
Oh yeah.
to to think about, and even just in the context of what we're just talking about, that these things have some type of editorial kind of
Is this
relationship with each other.
is
Yeah,
this
that one.
diagram in the ebook?
It is. It is. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a great one.
I like that one. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Links in the chain. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, little quibble. Muhammad didn't write anything. He was illiterate. But somebody wrote it for him. So
Somebody wrote, yeah.
yeah. But this idea that what would it mean for humans to live in a world where catchy melodies, scientific theories, technical tools, political manifestos, and even religious myths were shaped by a non-human alien intelligence that knows how to exploit with superhuman efficiency the weaknesses, biases, and addictions of the human mind. I think that summarizes his whole argument for me.
Yeah, and it is right. Again, it gets right back to what we started this on was the algorithm. Does this algorithm have, whether or not it's got agency, it's got intelligence? Who cares if it's got consciousness?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And ultimately, I don't know that it's even that relevant whether it has an independent goal.
Yes.
Just because of how much he shows that, that even, he goes on at one point when he's going back to where he's talking about Napoleon, right? He says, well, okay, there are these 5 other possible objectives that he could have had. And you might, and then in a paragraph or so later, he says, now you might argue that this one about, maximizing his chances of getting into heaven is bullshit because it's mythological. He says, but when you really look at it, all these other ones are based on myths too. The myth of the nation state, right? Why would it be? He said a lot of people argue that maximizing the predominance of France might be, might have been the goal that he should have focused on more intently. And he said, and then he explains, why France. He was a Corsican, who spoke Corsican and Italian and used his Corsican name until 1794 or something. So, and what is France, right? After, after, and especially what is France after the French Revolution,
Yeah.
And so what does it, what does any of that mean? So it's all, if it's all based on kind of myth, then we don't really understand the goals of humans. So yeah, how are we gonna say that we understand, the goals of systems?
Somebody comes up with a new one every few years.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, and then how are these kind of cybernetic systems embedded in, hardware and software different from other types of systems in our culture? Religions themselves, or societies, or polities, or whatever. Um,
Yeah.
it's it's interesting. I'm liking this a whole lot more than I thought I was going to, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, just describing again, and this is sort of going way back, but him describing the whole, you know, the idea of the book itself as, and again, this is stuff, the book itself is a technology, and is a revolutionary technology, and then, but
Hmm. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I'll come back to it. I don't know that he has really weighed in, or even demonstrated an awareness of my question. Is this a difference of degree, or is this a whole new thing? Is this a difference of kind?
well, I think he would be definitely on the difference of kind.
Okay.
Um,
He's saying that, but I don't know that he's demonstrating it
Yeah.
yet.
yeah,
Okay.
but he's got
Like
like a few more chapters.
we've got a couple hundred pages for him to make his
Yeah.
case.
All right. All right. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess that's me telegraphing what I'm hoping he's gonna get to. Um,
No, I haven't even started looking at the footnotes, and he's got a lot of them, and some of them are pretty long. So,
oh, good. Okay. I didn't think of that. I should go and see if there are.
Yeah.
Actually,
Unfortunately, I
once.
checked the footnote for the tax rabbit thing. It does not clarify in the print edition anyway.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's what I was just wondering about, is
He points to the
maybe,
Chat GPT scorecard.
uh, maybe maybe some of these differences that I'm hearing as I'm listening and reading simultaneously. I thought, well, maybe they've inserted the footnote.
Yeah. In this case, no.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Yeah, I think that, he does at one point in chapter, I think still in chapter 6, say, human networks like churches and empires were also organic. They had a lot in common with organic networks like wolf packs. And the point of that is what he calls the pre-programmed biological dramas. And that's been a question that I've had about Skynet, really, about the potential motivations of general intelligence. Is, what would it, not having evolved, or maybe it will imagine that it has evolved in a way that that causes it to maximize access to power systems or something like that. Um, but without biological drives, what motivations, would an artificial intelligence really have?
well, I mean, what's biological and what isn't biological? I mean, we've got, yeah. I mean, it just wants to exist. I mean, you can go all the way back to, Richard Dawkins,
Hmm.
and me. Yeah, I think the thing that doesn't get taken enough from Dawkins is that he's not saying that, memes are like genes, except they're just information. It's more like, no, genes are memes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all information exchange, and information, no matter what it wants to self-replicate,
Hmm.
wants to expand itself. So, whether or not it's on silicon, carbon,
Right.
or
Right.
or
And I
literally
think that,
electrons.
yeah,
Yeah,
I think that Dawkins has resisted because he's been challenged by other people,
of course.
like Brett Weinstein, to sort of embrace that. And he's just like, well, I'm not ready for that. I'm not ready to go there. That, that culture sort of replaces um, genetic evolutionary selection as the new kind of selection, not if not mechanism, the canvas or the playing field on which it happens.
Well, I don't think it's a new. I think it's just a better explanation. It's like, atoms versus, sort of, it's a more encompassing explanation of,
Hmm.
of, of how it is. I mean, but again, that's Dawkins's problem if he didn't want to take it.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's what when I first read that book 30 years ago or whatever it was. I mean, that was what I took away from it was, oh, the most interesting thing he's got going here is like, is something he maybe isn't even going all the way to, which is, that the information exchange is is the core bit,
Hmm.
whether or not
Hmm.
it's being
Yeah,
encoded in DNA or something else.
yeah, yeah. It's well, that would be interesting to sort of extrapolate to the world of non-biological information exchange systems. Um, yeah, the one thing that does that he sort of waves at in that section,
Mhm.
but doesn't state as explicitly as he might, is the time dilation of this,
Mhm.
of this evolution, right? That that if you have a distributed network, a distributed electronic network, global network, that can self adjust, I mean, that's the thing that they're always saying about the singularity, right? Is that the moment it happens, the moment that takeoff happens, there's no um, there's no catching up, sort of thing.
Yeah. Energy, computing power still takes energy.
Yep.
That's the thing. And by the way, looking at so this is from 2024,
Hmm.
right?
Yep.
And talking about like things not aging well. It's not even so much aging. I mean, Epstein was very much in the news all through the early 2020s.
Yep.
I don't think there hasn't actually been that much of a surprise with the Epstein stuff, and but and the word so neither Epstein nor Dawkins appears in this book
Hmm.
according to the index, which is
Right.
if you're going to talk about information,
Yep.
you maybe give a nod to the guy,
Yep.
and
Yep. Yep.
if you're going to talk about again, talking about
Well, and what does
explicit,
appear is a
yeah.
very long and elaborate bashing of Iran,
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
and killing, 500 women who he implies, were killed because of violations of hijab rules.
Hmm.
After the first one that he names, and then he goes on, by the end of
Yeah.
the second paragraph after that, he said, tens or hundreds of thousands imprisoned and 500 killed,
Yeah.
which I didn't think aged really well
Yeah.
either.
Yeah. But anyway, it's
Just in
fairly
terms
good.
of just in terms of
Yeah.
the stereotypes of who's going to take which side or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then he does actually identify the word nexus. I thought that was an
Hmm.
interesting passage, right?
Yes.
Where he says, in tax, and he takes it out of tax literature. He says, in tax literature, nexus means an entity's connection to a given jurisdiction. Traditionally, whether a corporation has a nexus in a specific country depended on whether it had a physical presence there in the form of offices, research centers, shops, and so forth. That identify that it was actually doing business there. And then he says one proposal for addressing the tax dilemmas created by a computer network is to redefine nexus.
Hmm.
And then he quotes Marco Kurtenberger, who says the definition of nexus based on a physical presence should be adjusted to include the notion of a digital presence in a country, which is, I think, going to be interesting.
Yeah.
Because I assume that, since he named the book that he's going to spend a lot of time in the last half of it addressing that idea.
which has already happened on the consumer level, as I recall, right? So sales tax traditionally had been charged
Hmm.
if you had a physical presence within a given state, but it is
Right,
now
right.
just charged regardless.
Yeah.
Well, sorry,
Or
oftentimes it's charged where the
collect,
end, yeah, it's charged where the end user is. And,
right.
which actually as I was listening to that and reading it, I was thinking he hasn't really distinguished yet between producers and consumers and
True.
where the tax
Yeah.
burden ought to be.
Mhm.
Or does he care?
I don't know.
I mean, it may be, and maybe he'll elaborate on this again. Dan, we're
Right.
thinking ahead.
Right.
But
Yeah. Yeah. But
is
I mean,
is
but
is the argument that my activities, as part of coming back to the algorithm that we started with, my activities are a process of creation. It's a feedback.
mhm.
So
Right.
is there a distinction between the endpoints?
Right. Well, he gives a really good idea, and apparently he's going to go back to cat videos again. He promises about Uruguayan cat videos and some Turkish software breakthrough or something that was sold to the Turks, and that so that said all this value is created by Uruguayans liking cat videos, and that this created an information stream that had some type of unanticipated value, right? That was then productized in a way that that some tech company, and this is kind of a Jaron Lanier-esque sort of an argument, I guess. That some tech company made boatloads of money on it, and the Uruguayans, of course, got nothing except the free access to watch cat videos. So yeah, it does. But it does. In the context of where these fortunes accumulate, it seems like it would be important, and I can't see how that wouldn't be part of his story ultimately.
Well, I'm not sure. Well, again, there's the whole computer politics that I've not. Again, I've just started getting into.
Mhm.
Where he's talking about democracies, multiple territories, the rise of digital empires. He's going to talk about that later.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. Back to sort of the Nexus thing and the taxation thing, and seeing something that's happening in the last few months or whatever, is lawsuits against social media for particularly about children, and not just lawsuits, but there's Australia has just banned social media for anybody under 16. There's somebody just won this week a significant lawsuit against Meta on that they were as a child were introduced to and made addicted to and as and intellectual. So I think, and again, I don't know where he's going to go with that at
Yeah.
all, but I
Yeah.
do think it's telling to getting back to that Nexus thing because he does talk about okay here taxing again how we control these
Mhm.
taxation is control
Yeah.
more than
Yeah.
and you know we are I think are seeing maybe a significant shift in how we treat uh, the things he's talking about because there finally looks like there's going to be some actual action about you know
Yeah.
reining putting control on this stuff.
Mhm.
I mean, it's there. There was no inherent reason why Facebook had, could operate in Myanmar with five five people that speak there and have no responsibility for
Right.
doing what they're actually for doing what they're actually doing. That was a choice.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
We did an algorithm back in 1996 when we passed the CDA and section whatever the heck it was that said you get to the whole point of that section 320 um was because we wanted to encourage the growth of the internet. And the way the internet worked back then
Right.
was it was free, and
Mhm.
barely anybody was doing advertising on it too. It was just, oh great, we want to make sure people don't get sued out of existence, so
Right.
this will keep growing. I mean, I was working and building,
Right. And the information wants to be free. Yeah.
information wants to be free, and everybody's going to be a not, nobody on the internet knows that you're a dog,
Right.
and that anonymity and being able to talk to everyone. And again, he gets into it a little bit earlier. He's talking about his personal experience of, being gay in a homophobic little
In a
village
little village,
in
and yeah. Yep. Yep.
it might have been, maybe it wasn't village, but small town, whatever.
Yeah.
It was a way to search that stuff out. But I mean, that was a specific choice that got exported to the world
Right.
because of people can say whatever they want, and nobody's going to be held accountable for saying whatever they want.
Hmm.
Including complete lies.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
including deliberate. For the previous, ever. We had the you can't scream fire in a theater.
Hmm.
Yeah, idea of and that you are that yeah, you can say things about public persons, but you can't say things about if you say something about a private person, that's libel.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and that so there's that kind of information sort of hygiene story,
Mhm.
right? But then he also goes on to say a tax system that knows how to tax only money will soon
Mhm.
become outdated,
Mhm.
right? And so and from there he rolls on to the story of social credit,
Yeah.
right? As a technology for sort of universal control, and he makes this really weird argument about money, which um, which
I for,
I have a little I have a
I may
little
have just agreed with him so quickly
trouble
that
with.
I forgot it. But is it basically that money and control, social currency are fundamentally the same thing?
Well, that money is just information,
Yeah.
which is, I guess let me see if I can find it and see exactly how he says it. Um,
That goes back to Sapiens. Actually, the most interesting part of Sapiens, it's the last third of it, where he's talking about the rise of economics.
mhm,
Money wasn't a thing for most of society, most of civilization.
mhm,
Um, you didn't have money. You had command. You had governments saying governmental like things, and maybe the government is the local liege lord or the sheriff or whoever, or you know um,
mhm.
or the polity saying, okay, here's who's getting what. That idea of money being a thing. Yeah, money is as artificial as anything else. Yeah.
Yeah, let me find it. He says, yeah, he says things like money is supposed to be a universal term, a universal measure of value rather than a token used only in some settings. Um, and then
Yeah.
he's talking about that, that again, that thing about, things being free, you know, but accruing power,
Hmm.
which later becomes money. And
Hmm.
I think that's part of the complication of it, right? Is that a lot of times, like in the case of Lanier, right? We were talking about how well this is just it's delayed money, right? That this is going to be that ultimately all of this information, control of information and access, to information is going to be monetized. It's going to be used to produce value, and I think he's expanding that idea too. It's also going to be used um, to accrue power and to control people.
I just don't. I guess my argument would be that's already what it is. Money is purely, in my opinion,
Yep.
as a super lefty guy, money is, in my opinion, purely a means of social control. It is just another way of doing social credit. It's just another social credit scheme. Um, social credit isn't a replacement for money. Money is just a different way of describing social credit.
Yeah, and I think that's the point that he's making, right? Because he talks about how things like reputation and stuff were harder to quantify. They were harder to put,
Mhm.
a numerical value on. And that's the argument, that's straight out of, economics 101, right? That there are economic values, things that can be monetized, and then there are other values like, moral values, aesthetic values, whatever, that are, or even transhuman, kinds of values that can't as easily be monetized, and that's why they oftentimes end up being externalities in an economic equation, right? And um, I think that's I don't dislike that argument. I like the idea that there is something very arbitrary about what we assign as value that can be understood numerically. And I'm trying to, I guess, as I'm saying that out loud, I'm trying to kind of fit it or slot it into some type of school of economics. And I guess I would say that, sort of Austrian economics would have said that all economic values are subjective and circumstantial, right? And the classic example is the glass of water in the desert, right? And and so um, and so if those things are not objective, and the problem that they always had, of course, was, well, okay, if that's the case, then what is the basis for your adherence to a gold standard?
Mhm.
So, but I guess that interests me too, right? The idea that you can have this thing that we that maybe we understand the absurdity of a gold standard, and yet,
I mean, ask Warren Buffett how much value gold actually has. There's a
right,
reason you can put a nickel in it.
right, and yet, relative to other things like fiat currencies in an inflationary period, there can be an argument for them. So yeah, so it's
Even gold is fiat. It's shiny.
right, right.
There's
Well, that's
a
the thing is it's fiat over a much longer duration and a much bigger sample size is really the only thing you could say for it.
I read I got halfway through and stalled out reading this wonderful book called the Incas, and it's written by this guy who was he was the son of a conquistador and an Incan princess.
Oh wow.
Fascinating guy. And it's actually the first book written in a Western language by a
Is it
by a
Tomo
native.
de Ayala?
That sounds right. Yeah,
Okay, cool.
yeah. Um, but anyway, the main thing he's doing is he goes off to he's raised basically as the other son of a duke.
Hmm.
This guy was made duke of something or other because whatever. Goes to Spain, tries to say, hey, I should be the duke or whatever. And they said, no, you're like half Indian. You don't get to be anything. But they did let him still act like a nobleman, and he was in the military. He was in the Spanish army for 30 years or whatever. Then he ends up going into a monastery. He never goes back to South America
Hmm.
after he leaves, and then spends the next 20 years of his life writing this series of books about the history of the Incas, just describing the Incas from basically stories that he'd heard from his uncles
Hmm.
on his mother's side, and
Right.
how. And one of the things that's really fascinating to me about it, though, is he's describing the Incan economy. Gold, there was no money. I mean, it was a dictatorship.
Hmm.
It was a caste-based dictatorship.
Hmm.
There's no money. gold, they had gold, and gold, you didn't trade gold for anything. Gold wasn't valuable. It was something that fancy people could wear,
Yeah. Right.
but you wouldn't trade it for anything. That was a gift that you'd give to people, and it had no, so yeah, there was no money. Yeah, anyway, gold wasn't money. Gold was not particularly important. It was just useful to put on buildings.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
decoration.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, I should read. I've read in that. I have not tried to read the whole thing.
It is a long book, and I got kind of tired of him going into some of the details of the the part that was key, that I basically left off was he's talking about the sort of the conquests of various generations of Incan emperors. Of actually, they were the only Incas. Were everybody else was a subject, but the actual Incas
Right.
were the leadership caste, and the conquests of how he that this emperor conquested this part, and this emperor conquested that part, and everybody like gradually and
That's the
just grew and
baguettes.
grew.
Hmm.
Begets, yeah, lots of begets, and extensive long begets and begets,
Yeah.
because we got here's the whole campaign that happened,
Yeah.
got very, very old. But on the other hand, he's talking about, the fact, it's like how the economy was structured and how they had um, canals. Okay, this is a complete digression, so I'm going to stop talking about it. But
Okay.
great book, highly recommend it.
All right.
And yeah,
All right. I
but
will jot it down.
not for this group. I would never suggest we go through it as a reading recommendation for this group because we'd all get really tired of it about the third way.
Okay. Okay. But I am fascinated by by that whole culture. So I probably will read it. Um,
Okay.
yeah. So yeah, I think this idea of what is valuable is going to be is I mean even just to step back even from this conversation about money and things like that just this as we're looking at AI and
Mhm.
and what is and thinking about questions about well what's work going to look like and what's and all of that. I mean it does strike me that one of the questions that we need to focus on and address is you know what things are of human value, of value to humans and sort of uniquely human,
Mhm.
right? And not easily kind of reproducible by by these alien so-called alien intelligences. uh, I do I do think that there will be um, that will be something that will need to be worked out in the next 10 to 25 years. And I don't think that anybody's really, I mean, I haven't noticed that anybody's like really thinking about that yet in kind of substantial ways.
Have you read Neil Stephenson's The Diamond Age?
Yes.
And something I found really interesting about that was his description of the authenticity. Basically, there was a whole, sort of subculture of people who were able to make their way
The
economically
craftsman people,
by,
yeah. Right.
by human, doing things by hand.
But they partially did that because the Vickies were so rich, right? And
Yes.
they were able to provide these things,
Mhm.
to the neo-Victorians, right?
Yeah.
That they were rich enough to be able to afford and they
Mhm.
were, and they were interested in status enough to value the fact that
Yeah.
they were human produced and unique and one-off rather than something produced through the feed, right? Through the
Right. But I think, and again, I'm not saying it's a utopia by any means. I think
Mhm.
it's likely. I think it's a very possible way of where economy might go
Mhm.
is
Yeah.
for humans to participate. It's going to be more about bringing authenticity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and authenticity, bespoke authenticity.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think bespoke authenticity is going to be a big element of it. I still have a suspicion about originality. uh,
Mhm.
because I haven't seen, um, language models, producing anything that's really struck me as being, oh, this is original. This is going out a different door that, you know,
Well, I think in math they've actually have been able to do some of that.
have they?
More sort of just sort of bulk things, and you've seen, I think, similarly with or math related things like, and again, I could be pulling this out of my wherever, but I like that he even talks a little about this with chess. Is like the way there's now the LLMs are able to and not actually come up with different chess moves or different moves in Go,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
are just so radical and weird. And so that is a sort of originality.
That is kind of an originality. Yeah, yeah.
It's something radical and weird and different.
Mhm.
Um, or I mean, yeah, I think he talks
I
in
wonder
one of
how
the
much
chapters.
that has to do with the moves. I don't know Go at all, but
Neither do I. Yeah.
my suspicion is of Go is that the moves that the way that people understand the possible moves may tend to get kind of channelized,
Mhm.
and that's something that cannot be sort of in that, sort of self-confined to that channel might have a leg up in seeing something that's, but it's again, it's also, the analogy that jumps into my brain when I'm saying that is of the local maxima, right? And the need to kind of sort of go down a hill so that you can get to the next higher hill. Um, I'm not
Um,
sure if that really connects. It just was something that popped into my head. Um, that maybe, but maybe if you've got an infinite number of cycles that you
mhm.
can, that you can devote to, trying out the rest of the terrain, that enables you to get to the next higher hill.
Yeah.
That would be that would be a contribution.
Yeah,
I mean,
I get. Yeah, and it's back to the math thing too. It's like it's easier to do, or even there's a fair number of scientific things I think where, you know, okay, you can actually can try all the iterations,
yeah,
um, and and I think that's part of it's brute forcing.
yeah.
Um,
It really is brute force. I was just thinking that too. Yeah, it's a lot of it's brute forcing because even like AlphaFold, I would imagine is,
yeah.
some things, the system knows some things about the possible configurations of,
Mhm.
depending on what elements you've got in what order in a protein or in a crystal or whatever, how it's going to behave.
Yeah.
Um,
Now, is that at a core level creative
and what
versus
is creativity?
oh
Yeah, yeah.
oh
So, so that maybe that's just, yeah, maybe that's a very biased, anthropocentric kind of a idea that I have in my head.
I mean, well, hey, we're products. I think we all agree we're products of evolution.
Yep,
Uh,
yep,
uh, I'm for evolution.
me too.
And so at core level, we are brute force. We're the result of brute force
Millions
experiments.
of years of brute force. Yeah. Yep.
Millennia and well,
Yep.
et cetera, et cetera. So,
Yep. Yep.
um, but yeah, I mean, but I don't know. I mean, I think there's a I think there is, and this is just purely out of my heart. I think there is a divine spark. I think there is, new. I think there is creativity possible.
Mm, mm,
Actual creativity, actually something new possible. I want to believe that. I need to believe that there is actual creativity, not just brute force
mhm,
possible there, and
mhm. Yeah.
that's my problem.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's the problem with a lot of this, and I don't even know, I don't want to even really dip a toe into religion, but but is it possible to be, back in the day, I think, when I was trying to meet people online, meet female people online, in my profile, I would say spiritual but not religious or something like that. Like, and I'm not sure if that's a meaningful statement, or if it's just kind of a wishy-washy kind of waffling thing. But is it possible for there to be, to be that type of creativity in the world without and having said that, of course, I guess I have to qualify that by saying that I think that all of the accepted narratives are incredibly arbitrary, and and so I don't think that it's a question of do they have to be that or something else, but what's available in the kind of in the space to for kind of humans to sort of hang their hat on and say that we are this, but we are this materialistic thing, but somehow more than this. um, that'll be an interesting, and maybe the rise of, kind of all of this sort of fundamentalist conservatism and Catholic conservatism and all the conservatism that's coming up just lately, in this, kind of online space that I've been, as you have already made me aware, too obsessively focused on. How much of that is due to this, to this becoming an issue?
And not just, and I think I just read this like yesterday, the day before yesterday, or whatever, very recently, is there is actually an increase at least in the US, in not just online but church attendance, and particularly, I know, like, the sort of Orthodox, it's suddenly there's a big rise in Orthodox Christianity,
Yeah.
and people showing a big recent expansion of, Catholic church attendance and the like.
I've heard that. Yeah.
It's not just, evangelicals.
Right.
Well,
there's actually,
except it depends which form of Catholicism. I mean, are we talking a J.D. Vance-ish, or are we talking a mainline Catholicism? I think that there's some distinctions in that, and this goes back to near you, of course. Well, not near, but nearer than either of us. The Dime Square movement, which was very Catholic in nature and trad.
Oh, see, I was going to say it goes back to part of it goes back to near you, Eric, and Pope Bob.
Well, which is later, yeah.
I mean, but lately, I mean, that I think has probably also, that shift has, and probably Francis was kind of pulling people in that direction too.
Yeah.
But Leo, I think, is, and especially also being American, that hasn't hurt at all.
They're at least now, and I think you're right, in the U.S. construct. I have been reading a piece fairly recently, again, that there was a survey done in the UK, I think it was the UK, that indicated that young males 18 to 30 are attending church at much greater rates. And then it was determined, actually, no, this is actually lousy survey construction, and it's all bots, because all these online surveys are incentivized. And so you automate your gathering of the incentives, and to meet the match, the underrepresented group is 18 to 30-year-old males. So you make your bot that, you get into the survey, you get the incentive, you answer your questions randomly.
Yeah. Or you mess with the numbers and you say that, that an increase from 2% to 4% is 100% increase.
It's 100% increase. Right. Yeah.
100% increase. Yeah.
Well, this came up this morning. We were talking about the ending of The Sopranos, and the Journey song played at the end, and what did that do to its popularity? This is a classic breakfast conversation, apparently. And I looked it up, and it's like, and it was 240. It had 240% more plays on the radio in the immediate succession, but it wasn't getting played on the radio before then. So does that mean 4 plays a day instead of 1?
Yeah. Right. Yep.
but I mean, again, back to the church attendance thing, and I don't. Again,
Which I do think,
anecdotal.
I believe anecdotally, I do believe that may be true.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I don't mean to be dismissing the
I agree.
And
I
I
agree.
just mean the
I
U.S.
agree.
Like,
I think there's
I mean,
both bad statistics and some reality there.
right. Yeah.
this is reported by this is reported by people, by various church people, I guess. And
Right. Right. Yeah. So the
I don't
people with
think
the
they're
numbers as
lying, but
opposed to the people counting the people who said yes.
Right.
yeah, yeah,
But I do think that I do think that it does suggest some type of uh, desire
Man, for me.
for something. Yeah.
yeah.
To whatever extent it's true. Yeah. And maybe, and maybe a desire for something human and not materialistic in the face of these, kind of materialist challenges.
All right.
And
But to
so
bring it back to Harari, because my first thought is you're saying human, and I think of those experiences as human in congregation with other humans. But
Mhm.
yeah,
Harari's going to point out that they're also mediated because you have the hierarchy of the church between you and the divine.
mhm.
Yeah, I was thinking more of the attraction of it being the human interaction
Right.
more
Yeah,
than
I
the
agree. Yeah.
the access to the scripture. Yeah.
Right.
But it is a good point. Specifically, the places where people are talking about this is Orthodox and Catholicism, which
Hmm.
are in particular, as you were saying, Eric, mediated. Have this. It's a more mediated experience with faith than this. Than Quakers or the like. Where you sit around and maybe you'll talk. And there is no leader.
Hmm.
Uh, it's sort of this re interest in actually going and doing the rituals. Um, you know, uh,
Hmm.
is again, I don't know what to pull out of that. But it is an interesting point. That yeah,
Well, it falls in the same kind of quadrant as, sort of responding to social media, right? It's not original activity. It's contact with people, right? So that's an additional value. That's an additional plus, right? It's also got a structure. So what was it? Jimmy Carr says that ritual replaces kind of original effort or something like that, right? So so you have a structure that's already built, so you don't have to create one for yourself. You've got something that has an aura of, authority and legacy and history and to whatever extent, people are influenced by, any type of a concern for, the classical culture of the West or anything like that. Uh, that
I,
those are all arguments for going to church.
I've got a different theory that just occurred to me. I don't know why it hadn't occurred to me, obviously. So, and this actually again, Eric, you were saying, that young people in the UK, young men in the UK, particularly going more, and I think that was also part of what people are saying. There's a lot of young men going to Orthodox in particular, but other things too. Um, yeah, it's also could be speaking to the utter failure of online dating as a way to meet.
Right.
Hmm.
The traditional thing of, what a great place to meet a partner is church.
Yep.
And if you've been completely flailing and failing at online dating, and I've certainly done my share of that.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's
Well, and you sort of know what you're getting, you think,
Mhm.
right? As you do that, you're not, you know, they might be a little bit, more straight laced than you
Well,
want them to be, but they're not gonna probably surprise you in a lot of other ways that would be less pleasant.
you meet them in person. And another thing, again, that the youngs are doing more is we're doing less. The youngs aren't drinking
Yeah.
nearly as much as so. it's a social activity you can do in person where there's no stigma of, oh, you're just, hitting on people,
Hmm. Yep.
and you don't have to drink, and it
Yeah.
doesn't cost anything.
And people are nice.
Yeah.
Generally.
Yeah.
There's an emphasis on that,
Yeah.
at least appearing nice, right? So yeah, that's interesting.
I should go to church.
Yeah, I should go. Well, tomorrow's going to be Easter. Yeah. So yeah, it's that and that was actually, I mean, my late wife was Episcopalian, and she liked going to church. So I went with her, and I we raised our daughters kind of as we went to church on Sunday. They went to and I was Episcopalian, so it was very nice. And the thing that sort of reconciled me to it, because I didn't become a believer. But the thing that sort of reconciled me to it was that people were nice, and the community did seem to be about, kind of circling the wagons and focusing on the families and the children, and making a nice space. And so from that perspective, it never did, kind of make me a Christian, but from that perspective, it was kind of mission accomplished. So there's a lot, and I wonder how much, people who have been, historically, who have been, members in places where, you weren't persecuted for not being a member and stuff like that, did it for those types of reasons.
Yeah, probably. Again, when like it's just all the way back to when you're reading the newspaper. When people would travel from town to town with, here's the newspapers, and people
Yeah.
would reread them. You don't have much else to do
Right.
as a social outlet except to
Yep.
go to church, or and then if you weren't the good church going person, you were the drink a bunch of whiskey and bear bait, whatever
Yeah.
bear, where you actually bait a bear. That's the social experiences. You go,
Yeah. 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 It's funny how much how much, even before wire services and stuff like that, how much stuff was duplicated from one newspaper to the next, from town to town, city to town, and all of that. Yeah. And it did create, and again, that sort of also created, sort of a shared experience, kind of shared, and a kind of a shared discourse that people could kind of organize themselves around.
or at least regionally, because in the South you were having in the South you were having different words said, different
Yes.
things said, and even just regional,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, well, in the South, yeah,
Or
the Yankee peddlers were bringing, pamphlets, abolitionist pamphlets down, and so they became sort of, unwelcome in a lot of Southern communities.
even in the big cities, and this is again something relatively unique about the post-war American situation of, you would have partisan newspaper,
Mhm.
you either read this or you read that,
Yeah.
and they were saying very different things.
Yep.
Within, and so but that was so.
Well, where
So,
I grew up, you read the Boston Globe, or you read the Wall Street Journal.
mhm.
The two groups that I was in touch with.
Well, in Chicago, it's was the Sun Times versus the Tribune, which would vary depending on who owned it, right? Whether it was Murdoch or pre-Murdoch.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But did they ever? But yeah, it's been a long. Is there just one newspaper in Chicago?
Well, we have the Sun Times and the Tribune. Sun Times is owned actually broadly by the Public Media Foundation, and
Okay.
it's employee owned more, and then the Tribune is
Yeah.
it's the Tribune.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm.
And they actually have opposing viewpoints.
Yes, though probably to a lesser degree given the homogenization of media.
Yeah.
But they also both do local reporting, and very different local reporting. I think they cover those beats differently.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So, what should we say we're doing for ourselves and for the folks who may rejoin us again next week?
We got through chapter 6, right?
Yeah,
We mostly, I think, yeah.
Yeah, I think we got through chapter 6. So
Okay.
that gets us to
So 7, 8, yeah, maybe just 7, 8, and then if we need to, we'll return.
Nine's the last chapter, right?
Sorry?
No,
Well, there's also a very long epilogue. Oh no, it isn't very long epilogue. But yeah, nine's the last chapter. So
well, no, there's 9, 10, and 11. So,
oh, I'm totally wrong. Yeah.
and that's that 9 through
Yeah, so it's a
11
whole
is
new
100
section.
pages.
Yeah.
So
I
we
thought we
want to
would
get
take that as a section.
So maybe we do you want to do 7, 8?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Try for 9 if we get
Let me
there.
just look at the page counts on 9, 10, and 11, see if one of them. So no, they're all, well,
7 is pretty.
9
7
is
is short. 8 is
40 page, 50 pages,
pages,
51
and
pages.
yeah, 9 is a whole new chapter. Is a whole new section.
Yeah. So maybe
Oh.
7, 8, and then, if when
7,
people
8,
come
dip
back,
into 9.
yeah, if when
Yeah.
people come back, they want to dip back into 6, we can accommodate that a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
9 is not short.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right. That's
nine's
what I
long.
was just thinking. Yeah. It looks like it's something we're going to want to focus a little bit on.
Well, there's been a lot to this book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. I thought his very final thing that he had to say about climate change was interesting.
Mhm.
About how we've got this thing, we've got these ideas, these facts, this data, right?
Mhm.
On the one hand, calculations run on one set of computers, he says, but then but then he sort of puts that beside, kind of social media algorithms, which is, also run on computers, but kind of it was like, ooh, that's a difference in kind in the two types of things that he's comparing here. But probably socially, he's got a point there. The one is overturned by the other.
Well, yeah, it's a whole big point in the I think 7 is computers are often wrong. They can
Yeah.
be wrong. They never
Right.
can be wrong.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
But they're not even. But the point of the algorithmic side isn't even about right and wrong.
Of
So
course.
yeah. So it's sort of like it's changing the playing field. So yeah. Anyways, cool. This was good. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good time.
Enjoy this. So see you next week, I hope.
All right.
Yeah.
See you in a week.
Ciao.
Bye.